Good afternoon. Our top story tonight, a judge has denied the Oregon Attorney General's request for a temporary restraining order to keep federal agents from making arrests at protests in Portland. In his ruling, the judge said the state lacked standing to sue on behalf of protesters. The Oregon Attorney General argued the officers have used unlawful tactics like using unmarked vans to arrest protesters without probable cause. Welcome to KGW News at 5 o'clock on this Friday. Thousands of people gathered again last night in downtown Portland to show their support for racial justice and to protest the presence of federal agents. The U.S. Attorney for Oregon calls the confrontational late-night protests in downtown Portland mindless violence, and today was critical of local leaders for not taking control. Here's Kylie Boshi.
This conflict is not only playing out on the street, but also in the courtroom. Late today, a federal judge denied a request by Oregon's Attorney General to place greater restrictions on the conduct of federal officers in Portland. Meanwhile, Billy Williams, the U.S. Attorney for Oregon, lashed out against city leaders for not taking control of protests in downtown Portland. The state's top federal prosecutor complained the nightly clashes between protesters and federal officers, which has resulted in damage to the federal courthouse, fires, and injuries to both sides, has been mischaracterized. He claims these aren't protests, it's just, quote, mindless violence. On Thursday night, thousands of people gathered outside the federal courthouse. Speakers, including the head of the local NAACP, rallied around the cause of racial justice. Around 1 a.m., after most of the crowd had left, a group tried to break through the large fence around the perimeter of the building. Later, a wall of federal officers could be seen throwing canisters of tear gas or smoke toward a crowd in the street. Federal officers took position on the city street at least 1 block away from the federal courthouse.
They're not out on the streets, okay?
They were last night. They were out on the streets. There's video of them outside of the fence.
Okay,
In previous
so
nights, we've seen them out on the streets.
Okay, so we can review what took them out there.
A pair of federal watchdogs have launched investigations into the authority and conduct of federal officers. And in another case yesterday, a judge ruled federal officers cannot arrest journalists or legal observers during the protests in Portland. Kylie Boshi, KGW News.
Meantime, the city of Portland has demanded the feds take down the fence and concrete barriers around the courthouse. PBOT says the barriers were illegally installed and create a safety hazard because it blocks the bike lane on Southwest Main Street. The city called for the fence to be removed promptly and will consider fines and potential legal action if it isn't. What's happening here in Portland is making national headlines, especially this week. From the mayor getting tear gassed to the wall of moms, there are many lasting images. Pat Doris looks back at what's been happening at the federal courthouse.
Last Saturday, we watched as moms in yellow shirts marched to the federal courthouse.
Moms are here! Feds stay clear!
They joined the protest against federal agents protecting it, and more broadly, President Trump, who sent them there. Later that night, federal officers pummeled Navy veteran Chris David as he stood in the street near the courthouse, something a federal oversight agency is now investigating.
I had no intention of leaving until I had to. And I wanted to show that I was not doing anything provocative or aggressive. I was just standing there with my arms by my sides. That's all I was doing.
That same night in North Portland, demonstrators set fire to the police union building, bringing an angry response from the union leader Sunday.
This is no longer about George Floyd. This is no longer about racial equity or social justice. This is no longer about reform or the evolution of policing. This is about violence, rioting, destruction, chaos, anarchy.
Sunday night, protesters gathered again in even bigger numbers at the federal courthouse. As the night wore on and peaceful protesters left, demonstrators tore down the fence put up around the courthouse and moved toward the front of the building. Federal officers used tear gas and other munitions to push them back. Monday morning, business owners in downtown talked openly about the city's core dying as a result of the homeless issues and then the pandemic and now the turmoil.
Do you think downtown can survive if this continues?
Look, everything is boarded up. There's no one downtown.
President Trump praised the federal officers.
We have more federal law enforcement, that I can tell you. In Portland, they've done a fantastic job.
Monday night, authorities took down the fence and large numbers gathered again at the federal courthouse. In one video, we saw members of the crowd toss an officer off someone they were trying to arrest. As another officer ran to help, at least one of them pulled their gun and pointed it at the crowd. Wednesday, a judge began hearing arguments brought by Oregon's Attorney General trying to restrict the actions of federal officers. Later that night, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler attended the protest.
We are on the front line here in Portland. If we are not able to get the federal administration to back off and leave our city, it will happen all across the United States, jeopardizing our United States Constitution.
He later felt the effects of tear gas along with everyone else standing near the newly erected fence at the courthouse. 6 people were arrested. Thursday, protesters explained what rallying against federal officers had to do with social justice.
Yes, we're out here for Black lives, and then all this other stuff happens, but we have to deal with that. We have to deal with the fact that Trump is now involved in trying to change the narrative and make this a bigger thing about him, and we have to focus, because on the ground it's the same.
And business owners talked about leaving downtown for good.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. I can't imagine wanting to keep our business here.
Late last night and again early this morning, there were more confrontations between demonstrators and federal officers. It has been quite a week, and it shows no sign of letting up. In Northeast Portland, Pat Doris, KGW News.
We've been covering these protests from the very beginning. If you've missed any of it, head to the KGW YouTube channel. We've created a dedicated playlist about the Portland protests. Today, Oregon reported 9 more people died from COVID-19. That is the highest number of deaths in a single day since the pandemic began. These blue lines show the number of daily cases since COVID hit Oregon. The dark blue dots are a 14-day average. You can see it's all trending up. Morgan Romero checked back in with a woman who's been sick since March.
It's like a bad dream that I just keep waking up to every day.
Amy Watson has spent 132 days with a fever and fatigue because of COVID-19.
You don't want to get this, even if it only, if it lasts a couple weeks, you're lucky. But we're predicting now 1 in 10 can have a long recovery. Months. I'm months into this.
Nothing has changed since I first met her a month ago. A preschool teacher in Portland, Watson misses the way things were.
I miss their smiles. I miss their hugs. I miss, chasing them and on the playground and playing tag and laughing with them every day, reading stories. And
she won't get back to that anytime soon if Oregon stays on what the health authority calls a, quote, troubling trajectory.
There are just going to be more and more long haulers like me who could potentially have lifelong health conditions.
OHA says 20 to 29-year-olds now make up the largest percentage of cases since the pandemic started. Big gatherings likely contributed as well, but officials hope new mask mandates will help slow the spread.
That means the coming weeks are pivotal. They will determine what school looks like for students and educators and how we sustain reopening Oregon.
New modeling lays out 3 potential realities in Oregon by mid-August. The most optimistic scenario has transmissions decreasing by 10% from the current rate, meaning new infections and hospitalizations would decrease. Things could stay the same, with a rise in new infections but stable hospitalization rates. And in the worst-case scenario, the transmission rate increases by 10%, and new infections could jump to about 2,300 per day, with hospitalizations increasing. Right now, OHA says hospitals can handle the surge in cases, but that could quickly change.
We have a choice based on these projections. Do we want to work together to get COVID-19 under control, or do we want to keep watching numbers rise and see our state move toward uncontrolled spread? For the health of Oregonians, the choice is easy.
Watson agrees.
And it's exhausting, literally, to be sick. And I'm sick of being sick, so.
Morgan Romero.
Please be careful.
KGW News.
The director of Oregon's health authority says we're starting to see signs nationwide. Shortages in supplies and collection kits are having an impact on the state's testing. He says right now there are fewer than 1,000 tests backlogged in Oregon labs.